Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Emily Hope Elkstwin, the Kamloops Art Gallery. My name is Emily Hope. I'm the Education and Public Programs Director here at the Kamloops Art Gallery. Before we get started today, I'd like to take a minute for us to situate ourselves. This concept of here is somewhat abstract in a virtual gathering like this, but for myself and those of you joining us from the region surrounding the gallery, here is Kamloops. I've introduced myself today in Secwepemchin because that's the language of this land. What we refer to as Kamloops and beyond, spanning over 180,000 square kilometers across the interior plateau of what we call British Columbia, is Secwepemchin, the territory of the Secwepem people. It is an immense privilege to be a guest on these lands, and I'm so grateful to my teachers, Jessica Arnoose and Sunny Prairie Chicken, for continuing to make space for me in their classrooms and for their generosity, guidance, and patience. I'm joined today by Robin Hodgson and Craig Willms, along with the folks from Collective Broadcast who are managing the tech in the background. Our program will be about an hour in duration, including some time at the end for questions and conversation. You can submit your questions throughout the talk using the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and you're also welcome to chat amongst yourselves and with us through the chat window. I'll begin now by reading a brief biography to introduce you to Robin Hodgson, and then Craig will offer an introduction to the exhibition, Sailing Pretty Close to the Wind, currently on view in the Cube. Robin Hodgson lives in Kamloops, BC, where he currently works from his home studio. Robin's art practice includes his work in painting and sculpture, as well as his efforts in promoting the development of the emerging art scene in his community. As a result of a motor vehicle accident, Hodgson has been a C5, C6 quadriplegic since the age of 19. Prior to his injury, he was an accomplished snowboarder and a member of Canada's junior national team. Robin's injury presents him with partial movement in his arms, and while he has no finger movement or tricep function, his biceps and limited wrist flexion allow him enough mobility to continue drawing and painting. Working from a wheelchair, he has invented and adapted a number of tools to overcome his mobility restrictions with the additional help of his assistant. Hodgson creates conceptual paintings where the process and the outcome are equally important, and he often experiments with new devices and tools to paint beyond the scale of his own body movements. His continued experimentation aims to develop a painting style unique to his disability, while expanding on the already existing history of notable artists within the disabled community. Hodgson holds a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree from Thompson Rivers University, and in 2019 received the Kamloops Mayor's Award for the Arts as the Emerging Artist of the Year. Please join me in welcoming Robin and Craig.
Thank you, Emily. I just wanted to start out with just saying a little bit about the Cube and our exhibition. So I curate the Cube as a project space, often kind of overseeing, I suppose, the development of new work and production of new work for our little white cube. In this case, I really got to see a lot more of the kind of progression and of the project as it went along. Often I meet with artists, we talk about a project, and then I do subsequent studio visits and we see things come together. Well, Robin and I have shared a studio for the past 3 years up until quite recently. So to see existing work in the space and seeing work move along, even particularly old work before we actually knew we were doing a project together at the gallery. So to see these things happen, you'd walk in and see paintings come together, of course, meet many of Robin's assistants, and just really get a sense of what's carrying over from work to work and what's carrying over from one body of work to another. So we have one of these older works that are not in the show, but I think very indicative of what has come out of this. So I'd like to turn things to Robin and just to speak to a few elements or a few things that came from previous work that have informed the exhibition that's now on in the Cube.
Hi, thanks, Craig. Yeah, so this painting that you can see right now was basically the first painting in the style that I'm currently working in. My previous works were, while I was doing my BFA, focused on surrealism and installation, and later abstraction. These are still abstract figuratives, but around the time, this is the exact time that I painted this, is when my daughter Poppy was born. And I felt like a lot of my abstract stuff had reached a limit in the stories that I was able to tell. And I always wanted to paint figurative and was influenced by the storytelling through famous Renaissance art. So this was my first in that series, and you can still see a node to Raphael's angels at the bottom. I like to have little nods to old masters as sort of looking to the past and reinventing painting, moving it in the direction of the future. And my surrealistic paintings were really finely detailed, and I would work like hours on just like 1 square inch, trying to like emulate realism as much as possible. And they would take like a very long time. And these paintings, because of the time crunches of having a parent and working in the studio, and just a way of like painting for my mental health and as a meditative practice, I started painting larger works that were more expressive, and I wasn't so worried about what the figure would look like. Instead, I focus on things like a balanced composition, and we can get into that later about the symbolism and the exact narratives. But I think this is really the starting point of the body of work that I'm working on now.
Yeah, that it's also not just say the narrative that comes through, but also iconography and particular symbols. I think as we see, if anyone hasn't seen the show, that you will get into more art historical reference, particularly I think kind of the early Renaissance religious painting, but then kind of not throwing in, but also a lot of surrealist kind of almost maybe not dreamlike, but kind of mixing symbols.
So I'm leaning into like a lot of different things that are going on, right? So I'm talking about my works are about the process of my work is equally as important as the final outcome. And I'm working on exploring how I can showcase that in future works. But a lot of things that I'm leaning into are like disabilities, or the large painting, Dead Flowers Trying to Be Awkward. I have a fighter plane dropping little Xanax pills, and of course like the war in the Ukraine and different things that are happening and in the peripherals of culture or politics. Not that I'm trying to speak about that, but they all filter into my work. I feel like I'm grabbing at different things in my surroundings, but in doing so, still telling a certain autobiographical narrative. But I don't want it just to be about, this is my work, I'm a disabled artist, but showing that through the way I paint in terms of my process. And I have an idea about my painting and like the direction it's going, and I've sort of built these symbols and characters that like a race helmet is sort of like a self-portrait. I was in a motor vehicle accident when I broke my neck, so it's kind of tongue-in-cheek. There'll be a lot of wheels Sometimes I have like Goodyear images or like Pirelli, like
Yeah,
just talking about
let's move into some of those images. We'll come back to this device here, but
Sure. So maybe we could pull up the large painting.
right
Yeah,
there.
there we go. So there's the plane at the very top, and this is 8 by 8 feet on 4 4 by 4 foot panels. So I was working with 5 by 5 foot panels, but my assistant, I'll introduce my assistant here. This is Emily Wood. She's an important part of my process too. She comes once a week for 4 hours and helps me prep my work. And we can get into that later, but at a certain level, learning to work with my assistants, I think I'm going off on a different train, but you can see the Goodyear logo, and it's kind of like looking back on the pandemic, and like I like to have dark humor in my paintings, and I like to have fun with them, and I feel like over the last 2 years since the pandemic, it's given me time to really work on my writing and sending out proposals, and a lot of time just to work on my paintings. Like I'm a dad in the day, and in the evening I try to put 4 hours every night into the studio. And so yeah, there's the race car helmet and the Goodyear, and it's kind of like reflecting on wheels, wheelchair, car tires. My accident, I crashed into a house at a three-way intersection, and it was February, and the roads were quite slippery. But also I like to paint from a point where like I'm not 38 years old and I'm not 17 years old, but it's kind of timeless. Like I'm pulling images of like, I really like to capture, like the invincibility of youth and those kind of split seconds decisions that can change your life. Or like you wake up in the morning and you're like, how did I get home? Or like, wow, I can't believe I didn't hurt myself from that. I also think it's kind of funny, like in terms of people with disabilities, you often get somebody coming up to you and they just can't help but sharing their story of the time I almost died. And I have a painting, your typical near-death experience, that wasn't in this show, but it's kind of like a joke about, like these kind of things. Or I'll have like a bandage on my finger and I'll be crossing the street, and somebody will just come up and say like, what happened? And I'm like, oh, I just hurt my finger. No, what happened? And I'm like, oh, like you want me to open up my trauma and tell you a story so you can tell me about. And so it's like all these things just kind of like coming together. And I don't plan the layout. I have some ideas of what I want to share, but I have reoccurring images. Like the race helmet's a self-portrait. The angel often refers to my daughter or my nephew. He's 4 years old and passed away last year. And so I bring these things into my work, but not on a literal level. Also, in terms of like being in a serious accident and being in a drug-induced coma for 3 months, and having pretty close death experience, existentialism and the angel and sort of other religious symbolic figures that I put in my work aren't necessarily like religious, but talking in terms of existentialism and how people have different views of what that looks like in terms of spirituality or non-spirituality, but how these symbols affect each other and how certain ones can be tweaked and jarring. And yeah, so do you want to interject, or I can continue talking about the complication?
Yeah, like the angels, I always associate those, and the cherubs, I guess in the earlier work, are Raphael. I actually, since the show's open, you've had me looking through my art history textbooks at Renaissance painting. I don't know how many different versions there are of expulsion from the Garden of Eden or original sin and banishment from the Garden of Eden, but that the pose of Adam and Eve figures in your painting have come out of that. You have Earth Day reference on there, which I believe it's this year. Like
Earth Day was one day before the show opened, and the Renaissance, the figures are taken from Masaccio's expulsion from the Garden of Eden. It's a fresco that's in the Vatican, and I draw everything out. So these big ones, I'll draw them on paper and then I'll project them and have my art assistant, Emily, just trace it out loosely for perspective. But they're always my own drawings, but they're taken from these textbooks. Like I look at it and I'm, you know what I mean? I'm not just taking these photos ever and projecting them, like digitally projecting them to trace them. I'm always using my own drawings. But the way the hands and just, I felt it was such a strong image. And then just to hack off a limb and that's my way of including people with disabilities into the conversation of modern art or where we are with art.
Yeah, the other element of this painting, well, two, the flowers that were in that earlier work.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that? And then I like the more obscure reference, even though it's in the title, in response to Vivian Lindeau's tree cats.
So yeah, this painting was started for my previous show in January with Tracy Kushner at the Salmon Arm Art Gallery. And what happened is I had blocked off 3 weeks to finish this right before the due date. And I had lots of stuff made out, but all three of us got sick, my partner, my daughter, and I, with COVID or the recent variant. And, it completely wiped us out for a week. And then just, so I brought it to a state where it was finished, but with this show, and so Vivian Lindeau is a post-war artist that is really influential for establishing the Alberta Institute for the Arts, the Alberta College of the Arts in the early days, with her husband, who's even more well-known artist. But her work was in the background and very important in establishing these institutions. And she moved to Salmon Arm later. And the show was in response to Vivian Lindeau's work. And the print that I chose was two cats in a tree. So that simplified, like, one, being stuck in a tree is similar to like being disabled. My chair will break down, or like, my leg bag will leak and I'll have to get changed, or all these like incidentals of being trapped and not having control over your own body. So that image resonated with me, and it gave me the opportunity to work on a large painting like this. This is the largest work I've done, 8 by 8 feet. And I think I underestimated actually how much longer it takes to fill in and physically work this stuff and move these paints.
We were having discussions 2 weeks before the show. Is the sixth work going to make it? Is this work going to make it?
Yeah. And I'm very happy with how it turned out, but it it changed quite drastically. But underneath each of my paintings is 3, sometimes 4 other paintings that I'll completely paint over everything except for 1 or 2 images. And I work with a lot of pentimenti, an Italian term for the underlayer or preparation marks in your painting that are exposed. So I'll do like, I'm working with a lot of underlayers where I'll paint the background one color and then paint another color on top of it, scratch away at it. You can see this is so big that it's kind of hard to see some detail, but like at the bottom left panel in between the figure and the tree, there's orange. So the whole background was orange on that side as a point. And I feel like putting together a painting is like putting together a puzzle. I don't have it directly laid out what I want to do because I feel like I would be it wouldn't be as exciting to me, but then also I box myself into these problems that I have to solve. So a lot of detail is in the work is really like just scratching away sgraffito, and you can see the underlayers coming through. Same with at the very top of the painting. I painted like trying to get all the different colors in a way that were harmonious and balanced. I had like a fuchsia at the very top, but it's just too bright, but I still wanted that color. So I roughly painted over top of it. So my work is a lot of painting and then painting over it. If I like it, I'll leave certain parts, then going back into it, letting drips just kind of like, I didn't notice this, but on the male figure above the genitalia, there's a white drip of paint that landed kind of right underneath the penis. And some people have noticed like, oh, how could you put, but it was just filling in the helmet and background, and it had just dripped. And I often like to leave these, I think some of my accidents are, I like to leave these happy mistakes. I find the unconscious things that help, or the unconscious elements to my painting, when I really get in there, are some of the best parts. Sometimes my favorite part of the painting is when it's white and just going in there and laying out an initial background. I'll try to have it so it's not too thick with texture, but laying out these undercolors and the rough ideas. And for me, that's a very meditative and exciting part. And then comes putting it all together and then problem solving. Like, yeah.
Let's look at an example of that. Half of nothing is still nothing. I think it's 2 slides back. That one.
Yeah.
This one is actually one of the ones I enjoy the most. Like you talk about the white space, the drips. Sorry, pointing at it on the screen here.
Yeah.
But then scratched in words, and then more layers of paint, and kind of a little more bare and less, I would say, traditionally narrative, like Renaissance paintings.
Yeah, this is more abstract. I mean, on the lines of that, but continue, sorry.
Yeah, and with the scratching and layering and underpainting, it also obscures and reveals words and objects and symbols and things. Like I know the pharmacy in the bottom right because that's across the hall from our studio.
Yeah.
And then there's other elements kind of obscured and revealed throughout here.
Yeah, Narcan.
Yeah, can you speak to some of that, and then also why this one seems more different than, say, the rest in this body of work?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about a very serious subject of the opioid crisis. PharmaSave in downtown Kamloops on Lansdowne Street. The owner, Clancy, is extremely compassionate, and there's more people who are displaced with the housing crisis. And, you know, I think starting from the painkillers and how addictive those were, and then people going into harder drugs, and then just people that have fallen on hard times. I think there's a lot of functional alcoholics and functional addicts that live day to day, and the pandemic has really, it's just paycheck to paycheck, and that stability has thrown them out. And you know, Kamloops is sort of a catchment basin for many small communities where, you know, we have more facilities than a city like outreach facilities than a city like Kelowna. And we also have all these smaller outlining communities that come into Kamloops. And, you know, during the Olympics, they would send street people to Kamloops as a way to get them out of the city. And, you know, I'm very compassionate towards this issue. I've, like many of us, have lost friends, either passed away or still in the grips of their addiction. And so I wanted to speak on this matter, but finding the right way to do it tastefully. And I felt like the compassion of the owner of PharmaSave, Clancy, he lets his clients come in, and like, if they need like some food or a chocolate bar, they can wash the windows, and he sets a computer and just like is very caring for these people. And there's a real divide in the building of that, where half the people in the office building didn't want these people in the building. They felt unsafe because some of them, when they're off their medication or you know, visually it can disrupt somebody's day. But I think it's very selfish to think like that. And I think as a society, I'd like to work on how we can solve these solutions. And I thought PharmaSave was doing a really great job. Now, saying that, there's also images of a pipe and, you know, a tree that's flourishing and a tree that's dead, and it says Narcan above it. And I think like putting that in there is like, it was putting myself out there as far as like talking about these things and thinking about my career as an artist and where I want to go. But I felt like it was very important, and this kind of stuff wasn't being talked about, at least in art that I was seeing. And so the tree that is flourishing is on top of a big book. And in AA and NA, Narcotics Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous literature, there's a big book and there's a step program. And I think so the tree and the book that is underneath the flourishing tree is on one side, and there's an empty tree. And so I'm not like clearly thinking, I'm not like, each thing I paint doesn't specifically mean something, but it's more of a feeling that I put there. And then underneath the other tree is two poppies that are very small, but they're like, you know, what comes from a poppy is a lot of these pharmaceutical stuff. And there's a fine line between pharmaceutical, heroin, opioids, and just street stuff. And yeah, I don't know. And then in the top, I just wanted to have like some flowers and a little bit of hope. But then below that on the left panel, there's like, is just an underpainting, and I scratched away at it and kind of reminded me of a skull and like, you know.
Those
so
flowers appear in previous painting. They appear in the painting that's not in the show, the earlier work. Is it all poppies? Is that all a reference?
No, not just because my daughter's name is Poppy, which it is, and I think about that a lot. But the flowers are like a symbol of growth and hope, and I think beauty. Yeah, you know, a flower is something that needs to be planted and cared for and nurtured, and I feel like it's a similar process to my painting. You know, like you have an idea, a seed of an idea, and and it's not like I think about all these things in terms of my process, but they're just kind of, I feel like I've always been better expressing myself visually than vocally, right? So, I mean, there's language arts, and I can express my ideas like this, but I'm not just saying one thing or another here. It's really open for interpretation. But my feelings behind this direct painting were the compassion for not only the people that are struggling with this, but for the friends and family members who are recoiling from the effects of their loved ones, and just the overwhelming number of people who are displaced in our community and communities across our country.
Yeah, when we started discussing like more, I'd say more specifically what this project would look like, something I think you returned to a lot was having the kind of autobiographical element to it, but then taking a lot of that kind of life experience and stuff, and then kind of extrapolating that out to more social problems or the broader perspective on these things. Let's look at Sailing Pretty Close to the Wind. I think that's 2 shots before this one. And the title one. And you know, this one too, this also sparked this kind of looking back at a lot of Frida Kahlo kind of surrealist imagery. Kind of, we have a lot of iconography in this one again, a lot of the obscured and layering. I'm sure maybe I've seen this one the most, because I think, as you say, there's other paintings underneath it.
You've seen the whole process. This was like, see the face at the bottom left? The entire painting was a grid of all these like charts where I was trying to work out this abstract idea of how a new language is being created with emojis. But I wasn't able to resolve that, and that's not the direction I wanted to go. So I had this painting sitting there that had some incredible colors, but it's like I say, if it's not working, it's not working. And so this is a good example of the speed that I work too. Like, although my paintings, something like this will take me 3 weeks if I have an assistant and I'm working hard, if I'm working every day. But yeah, I feel like for a long time, like a lot of social issues are becoming normal to talk about and safe, but I never talked about my experience with my friends. I never spoke about how every second day I have a bowel routine, and that takes 3 to 4 hours. I've changed my diet to being a vegan, plant-based diet for the last year, and that's helped. But I feel like having a disability, especially if you're in a wheelchair, a permanent disability of any kind, there's what that looks like, not being able to walk, the tip of the iceberg. But under the water of the iceberg, there's all these other hidden things. And there's a level of shame that comes at 19 years old of breaking your neck and rebuilding your life, and hanging on to my art before was doodling in sketchbooks and skate magazines and stuff, which we can get to later. But I think there's art in like snowboarding, and I was on the national team for half pipe, and just the rhythm and balance and fluidity of these things. I'm sort of going off on a tangent, but how they relate is, I was really uncomfortable talking about my disability, and there was shame. And for so many years, I was in a manual chair, and I would have somebody helping me push me around until my partner was pregnant, and it was no longer capable, that I started using a power chair that I didn't physically push myself. I always thought that like it was like more chair, less me, and trying to hang on to this more of an independence of being in a manual chair and how that looked, but then realizing that I just cashed my cool card in, and when you become a parent, like it doesn't matter. I just want to be, I'm more independent. I can do more, and my child can sit on my armrest and interact with me and climb on me in different ways that would never be possible with a manual chair. I think even when we started at the studio, I was using a manual chair, and Miranda would, I only lived 2 blocks away, but Miranda would have to push me up third all the time. But once I had this, I was able to whip up to the studio, get in and out myself. And it really opened up a whole broader aspect that I found myself a few different things in my life, looking back, like, why didn't I make that change years ago? Right. But just being 19 and having something like this happen, it was quite traumatic, but I didn't really, I wasn't in the place in my life where I was interested in meeting with other people with disabilities or hanging out with other people in chairs. And I just wanted, like, if I was into mountain biking, I would be on top of all the new mountain bike stuff. But when it comes to wheelchair, it just like, I just wasn't ready to address that. And in this new body of work and in fatherhood, which has paralleled the last 2 years of my working, my art practice, I've learned to kind of just let a lot of that stuff go, because I know my friends accept me for who I am, and I know the art community will do the same. And I think it was just mostly me. And so to come full circle in this conversation, I have started to talk about things with disabilities and advocate, learning how to write letters to, say, a certain business, not in a way where I want to cancel them, but like, if a pharmacy doesn't have a push button door for me to get in, and they ask me to just knock on the window to get their attention, that's derogatory for me to have to sit outside of a pharmacy. And this has happened where I have to ask a stranger for help. Like, and I used to ask people for help all the time before, but I think it comes with maturity and also advocating not just for myself, but for the greater community of people with disabilities in Kamloops.
I think that's come through in a lot of the work for this show.
This painting is sort of talking about some of those things, like quitting smoking before my child was born. And I've also moved to painting bigger works and works on easels, because I used to do like a lot of like tight lines, super micro, tiny brushes, and I would lean on my elbow a lot because I have no abs. Leaning forward on my elbow has just, and I have a couple elbow injuries from falling out of my chair and, just being a teenager and doing extreme sports and riding handrails on my snowboard and falling downstairs. And so showing like tennis elbow, otherwise known as medical epicondylitis, and showing some of these other things like a blood clot in my lungs and the ulcers that I get from stress, from, some people think, anyway, so
maybe this is a good segue into some of your adaptations, like the one of those early images of the spray gun bike brake. I like the bike brake on here.
Before that, I'll talk about, I couldn't find it. because I don't use it anymore, but it was a splint that would go on my hand. I developed it before I had even moved home. I was in a rehab institute called GF Strong after I came out of Vancouver General Hospital for spinal cord and brain injury rehab. So the occupational therapist set me up with, because my first thoughts when I came out of the drug-induced coma were, will I ever be able to, because I knew snowboarding was off the table. I just could tell my body something was wrong. I didn't know, but subconsciously I knew. And so I remember the first thoughts I had was, will I ever be able to paint again? And will I be able to have a family? And looking back, that these things have come true. And yeah, it feels like I'm come to a place where I'm very comfortable with my work. And these tools were a part of making that. So the splint I had on my hand would go under my finger and I would have Velcro. So all my paint brushes and stuff would have Velcro on them. But of course they couldn't really get in, and the line quality wasn't that great because I was trying to emulate my work previous to my injury. Now I can hold a pen by just putting it like this, as I have wrist extension, but no flexion. I can't move it up this way, and I can move my arm up to about here, and then I have no triceps, so it falls. So in making this spray gun, I could actually show you. If Emily could bring it here.
Yeah.
So a lot of these tools are collaborative, where I actually taped the gun to my hand. And if you could come into the shot a bit more. It's this came off. It's a industrial spray paint user gun, mostly made for like house painters who are spraying large areas or like your lawn furniture. So it's clipped on here. I usually wrap it around my hand with some tensor bands that I have, or just electrical tape seems to work the best. And what it is I'll do a line or write something in my painting or fill it in, and I'll just simply say go, and Emily squeezes it. So I'll say go, stop, go, stop, go, stop. And it's incredibly inaccurate, but we've I'm leaning into my line quality. Everybody, like, you come to a certain point in art and you want to have a unique mark, and these tools give me these unique mark making capabilities. And so this was an early tool that really helped me use paint in the way that I wanted to before. And I still use it today. In all the murals that I've done, I guess my last mural that I've done is in Kamloops, at least, was on the west side of the Kamloops Art Gallery.
Oh yeah.
That was a lot of abstract shapes that were similar to this previous work behind me.
Yeah, so that mural is on the little concrete short wall in the parking lot.
Yeah, it's about 6 feet high, a pony wall that separates the underground parking from the library TNRD art gallery.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It relates to the painting behind you, and if I remember correctly, it's furrows from shapes or colors or something from the surrounding area of the gallery.
So the paint, yeah, these two have a different context. The painting at the gallery was developed by me and Monica. Gary, yeah, Monica. And so what we wanted to do with that is not just paint an abstract mural, but we took photos of the shapes of the architecture. The architecture for the Kamloops Art Gallery, TNRD libraries, the two of them are quite renowned architecture. And for the time in Kamloops, it was a very beautiful and modern building that a lot of people, I don't think, know the history of that. So we wanted to highlight that. And the mural takes photos. You can put that down for now. The mural, we took photos of the different shapes of architecture, different shadows that the gate left, and we included them all in the mural. I don't know if we have a photo of that. It's on my Instagram if anybody wants to look, and we can post that after.
Yeah, or come on down to the gallery. See, go walk around the gallery, go to the show.
And the show has been extended till June 22nd.
Correct. Yes.
So yeah, but this one here, if you could hold it, this was during this one again. This was during the shift from abstraction into figurative abstraction. I'm not sure exactly what to call my work, but this symbolizes, me and my partner did IVF and worked with a fertility clinic in Vancouver. My sperm count was maybe 6 sperm, and a normal count would be 1 million to 1.5 million. So we had our work cut out for us. We had many trips to Vancouver, and this symbolizes the driving, the mountain ranges, and different, just like a meta view of the geography. And also, I'm a pretty firm, and this is she's a test tube baby. It's a petri dish here. And so all these different ideas, and then welcome here. So, the power of positive intentions. At the very end, we only had 1 embryo after all of our work. My partner had many eggs, but there was only 1 embryo that was viable. And she's our little miracle. That 1 embryo made it.
Yeah, and we see her.
That's what that painting is about. And then moving on to, could you switch the computer? Over here I have, can you move that surrealist one first?
There it is.
So this was the transition from that abstraction to figurative work. And I've always wanted to do figurative work, but I never felt like I had the drawing skills to really do that. But I just felt like I have a disability. And so my mark is unique to anybody else's. And I just kind of stopped caring about having it so perfect. So the face on here is my reference was a photo of Poppy, my daughter, smiling, very young, before they even have teeth. And then she's was born in August, so her star sign is a Leo. So Leo the lion. Let me turn that back. Leo the lion, and then I have elements of 2 angels, and these lines in here were from a previous painting, a more abstract painting, and they're an optical illusion. So might be a little bit hard to tell in the photo, but in person it's a lot easier. All these lines are completely parallel to each other, but the geometry in them makes them those exact shapes where they are, gives a sense of bending perspective. So the story I was trying to tell is, Poppy, there's the poppy flowers, lion is her star sign, Leo the lion, and of course she's my angel. And Miranda was in labor for 36 hours. So it started out in a day, and then a night, and then went all the way into the next day, and she was born in the final evening.
Oh.
So I tie all these elements together, but in doing so, I balance a composition out. So similar to Renaissance painting, sometimes I'll just take a golden ratio, and I thrived in math as a student. I wasn't very good at language arts, but math was something I could understand. So I mapped out the golden ratio, the spiral, and I will, not in this painting, but I'll just draw one out on an image like the Save on Foods painting that I have that wasn't in the show, but I'll map it out, and that, I feel, it gives me points on this spiral to lay things out that are aesthetically pleasing, to having shapes in certain places. And so the placement of these are all equal and important to create a balanced composition and, you know, color that is in harmony, but all doing this without a clear plan, working it, painting over it, going in. I use two mediums. I'll use strictly oil paint, which I'm working on for my next show in Vancouver at Crack Gallery on June 23rd. I'm doing a series of small paintings that are all oil, but these big paintings, I use mixed mediums. So they're primarily acrylic and latex. I'll use house paint to prime it. And then if you could go get one of those latex paints.
You know what? I think this kind of brings us full circle back around through the process into this painting. We're at about 10 or 5 to the hour. So
Okay.
this has been great and informative. And I just feel like perhaps there's some questions out there. Maybe we can bring Emily
Yeah.
Hope back into the picture and see if we have any questions or comments. There's certainly a chat going along.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'd be happy to show that. And in the meanwhile, I'm going to get some of the materials that I use to show some of the paint mediums. So
So far we have a number of comments in the chat, and we'll give folks a minute. Oh, somebody beat me too. I was gonna say we'll give them a minute to formulate their question and put it in the Q&A, but Chero has fast fingers. So Chero says, "It is so insightful to hear you speak so honestly about your work and life. Thank you. You mentioned you were thinking about ways to incorporate your devices into your work. How are you thinking about doing this?"
yeah, that's a great question, Cheryl. I see some of the devices that I've made as sculptures, and I would like to show them in combination with the works that I've created. I've also started working on a couple sculptures because I feel like sculptures are a nice segue and a different way to show my story that I'm unable to do in painting. So I planned on doing this for the show, a new tool, which happened to be it's a sling and a lift. So it's a tracking along the ceiling, and there's a lift attached to the tracking. And then I have like a harness, like a hammock that lifts me up. So in creating these 8-foot paintings, I had set up the tracking system in my studio, but during the same time, the getting in and out of the shower is very quick with these slings, but spending 20 minutes at a time or more was starting to give me skin abrasions and skin breakdown. Pressure sores are like common for people using wheelchairs and skin breakdown because of the lack of circulation in your body. So unfortunately, I was unable to keep using that as part of my process, but I'm really interested in finding new tools for mark making through these, making new tools to help me create new marks, and finding a different way that I can use this sling to paint higher up. Not that I can't take these apart and make them lower and paint them, but just building on notable artists like Frida Kahlo and Kirsty Brown. I believe he had ALS and he painted with his toes. He's a lesser known he's a lesser known artist, but very important in terms of art in the disabled community, and well worth looking up, Kirsty Brown. So building upon these other artists that have broken down barriers, artists with disabilities that have broken down barriers, and looking at how I can include my disability into the process of my work and to advocate for other people living with disabilities. So for me, that looks like showing these tools and also documenting, like video documentation of how I create these paintings is something that I'd like to include in other shows.
Robin, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your palette choices. The colors that you use are incredible. It's one of the things I've always really admired about your work is that you have no fear of using these incredible, bright, vibrant palettes. And you seem to have a couple of like favorite colors that you can see coming through, like certain pink tones, certain kind of like teal or blue tones that repeat.
So what I started doing actually with the Kamloops Art Gallery mural is, these are called, from Sherwin-Williams, Just to Go. And they're about $10 and they're samples. They're sample paints. So, oh, you want to test a color out at your house? So you can get these, and this is a pint. And for $10, it's latex and it goes a long ways. When I do like a detailed figure, I'll use acrylics, of course. This is my favorite paint here. I was gifted 25, maybe more tubes from Monica Geary. Thank you, Monica. And it's called Stevenson's. It's a Canadian paint company, but it's now gone under. And the more paintings I'm doing, the more I'm learning about having proper canvases. And I used to build my own stretchers and panels. But when you're working higher than 4x4 feet, it's so easy for them to stretch and warp, as I'm sure you guys know, or Matthew Tremblay, thank you. A lot of those works were quite warped. Even taking these works from a place like Kamloops, which is really dry, to Salmon Arm on the water, or Penticton, the humidity just warps them. And then sometimes they dry out and come back and go back, but they often don't warp in pretty ways. So learning that, you know, if I'm going to do a painting, using quality materials, and a lot of my work is applying for a show and then building that body of work now, in terms of just making a series of works. And if I'm just making it and I don't have a show, I'm always following the same, and not even intentionally, but kind of just learning what works better. And I can show a couple of my big paintings that have previously been shown, and create a few more that also work with the same narrative. And recently, I wasn't a big fan of Liquitex for a while, but they seem like they've changed their formula. And I just got 60 tubes of this. But I think the best paint right now that's Canadian made is Tricolor. It's a, I mean, it's not those super finely milled paints that the Japanese are famous for, but for the type of work I'm doing, they seem to be really well. They're relatively decent price for professional quality paint, and I like to support local as far as I can get. close as I can get. And so does that answer your question?
I wondered if you could talk about your color choice with your paints. as
Right.
well.
So I have a few staple colors that I like to use, and I have a color wheel that I keep in my studio. And so I've spent a lot more time reading about colors and gradient colors and complementary colors, opening up my old art school textbooks, because of course we learn about this later on. But as my painting develops and matures, it's like as I mature, my painting matures.
Mhm.
And learning a next step is color is very important to your color choices, and realizing that not just show like just because I have like a nice like tube of something like this that is a nice color, I'll buy 4 or 5 so that I can go back and fix mistakes or use more of it, not just these little shouts, but really trying to balance the colors out. And even with further works, I've been thinking a lot more about what my personal color palette will be, like Matisse, Picasso, and my personal favorite, Guston. They all have their very specific color palettes that work. And once you find a formula that works, it's really beautiful to stick with that. And it's consistent through a period, not meaning that you have to stick with it forever or even just for one show. But I feel like I've a lot of things from art school and maybe just where I am in my life, things have clicked in the last couple of years. And just like my daughter motivates me, right? I was a third-year residential carpenter, a year away from journeyman carpentry at 19 years old when I had my accident. And I decided then to switch to a career that I loved. So this is my lifetime to do something that I loved, and trying to make a profession out of it, and looking at all different avenues as far as like, teaching workshops, working with different companies for branding. And so I think you'll see a more curated color palette in my coming work, but I do have certain colors that I have this goes a long ways, and I get 2 of them every time. I use I'll buy a gallon of white paint, and that'll last me like 3 months. So I go through quite a bit of that. And the
I'd
color
say a lot of
choices,
that came together quite well, Robin, for this show.
yeah, I
It's
think
a
it's
curated color palette, but it's worked well through this body of work.
Mhm.
I think just working with your materials, like I've been painting for years, and I graduated in 2013, and I for my grad exhibition, I focused on painting, and it's something that I'm able to do independently. I mean, for the most part, and it's something that I've always loved and done as a child, and I wouldn't go as far as saying I merge my paintings with art therapy, but I think there's definitely a therapeutic element that is involved in my painting. And it's like inspiration is fleeting. It lasts for a minute, but like when you're in the zone, it's a meditative process where, like, I've talked about this in my work at the Penticton show, but flow state. And I feel like when I tap into that, there's a lot of happy accidents that come out. But yeah, in terms of color, I've been thinking about what my color palette is going to be, at least for these periods. And I'm working with a lot of like gradient colors where mixing grays into each color, mixing white into each color, and learning how to create an atmosphere. A lot of these paintings don't have, they're kind of like landscapes with other stuff that is put into them, at least in terms of, what is that one called with the painting, a trife with nature to outdo the life. That painting with the train and the boat, the ship, that's kind of more similar to a landscape. So learning how to create atmosphere and color can balance a composition. You don't want something that's too heavy. I find like a really favorite color combination is forest green, like a ballet slipper pink, and white, but you just have to have a little bit of green, a little bit of pink, and a lot of white. And there's certain feelings you get from certain colors. And I feel like I really achieved that with a trifle with nature to outdo the life, the 4x7 foot painting. The orange and the dark blue that I was using really played well with the mix of white that came in. And I've added a lot of white into my paintings. And I've heard some criticism from some people or friends that like, well, white makes it look unfinished. But I feel like white is a very powerful shade, just as a blank. And I like doing things that kind of make it look like some of these look like I just threw them together and I did it over a weekend.
None of them look like that.
No, well, when you do painting, you know.
Yeah.
But
we're actually running over time.
okay, yeah.
But I know we have talked in studio like this for a while as well. But it's great to get the insight. And yeah, I mean, I like that kind of basic idea of figuring out what the material is and how some of these choices are made. I think in some of the media that we've had so far, one of the realizations is that I enjoy just looking at the painting, like the actual paint to surface and palette, and seeing all that come together, as well as delving into everything we've dealt with today, like talking autobiographical.
Yeah, you made a couple comments that I was really happy to hear. Craig in the studio is very stoic. He won't interrupt you. If I'm painting, it's hard to even get a hi out of him, which is appreciated because we don't want to be disturbed. But at the same time, I'm always thinking like, well, he sees these paintings, like, what is he thinking? But yeah.
Well, we made it. We're here. It's on. Everyone.
Yeah, no, and thank you. I feel like it turned out really well. And is there any more questions from?
We have one last question. It's from Margaret Krumka. She asks, Robin, you don't have to answer this, but I'm always interested in artist process. Do you set a time aside each day to work, or do you grab time as you find it, or other?
Both. I set aside. I have a situation with Poppy where I will help her and read her stories while Miranda does her gardening. She's very passionate about that. And I set aside 4 hours in the evening. I usually go to bed late, but as I was saying earlier, my morning routine, my bowel routine and stuff can take 3 hours, 4 hours sometimes. And so I stay up late, and that's when I have my time to myself as a parent. Me and Miranda, we both work from home and have a child, so we're home together all the time. So early in the morning is when I sleep in, and she has her time with herself. And in the evening, even if I'm not working, painting, I will set aside the time to either write, and I've since moved a studio into my garage. so I can just go in there and work at will. But also it's finding time when you have time. I find that like having a studio separate from your house is amazing in so many ways, but also having somewhere where you're close and you're living with your paintings,
Mhm.
I'm able to look at them or come back from a walk and I see something in a new way. A lot of times I'll be working on 2 or 3 paintings at the same time. And so I'll hit a wall with one area and then I'll be able to come back and look and, oh, okay, like I don't know what it is, going for a walk or something, you see it in a new way. And so working on paintings at different stages helps with that. And I think it's important to make time to be with your work. I try to do it every day, but of course, being a parent, sometimes that doesn't happen. But yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much, Robin. You've shared so much with us. This has been a fantastic talk.
Yeah, thank you. I really
enjoyed it.
And working with the gallery has been a pleasure.
So for anybody who was unable to come today, if you want to share this great talk with them, we're going to edit it and then get it up on the internet probably by the end of the week or early next week. And you'll be able to go on to our website, kg.bc.ca, to access that.
Can I show one more
And
thing?
yeah,
I thought you were done.
go for it.
Just my surrealist work from before. I brought one up. Can you grab it, Emily? So this is the work that I was doing, the surrealist work before I got into abstraction. Anyways, yeah.
I think I remember that from BFA. Maybe is it from your BFA?
That was from my BFA show, yeah.
Which is, yeah, probably when I met you, 3rd or 4th year.
Exactly.
10 years ago, something like that.
Yeah, getting on there, yeah.
All right. Thanks a lot, Robin. Thank you, Emily. I think we're wrapped. Yeah.
Yeah.